Hello, and welcome to the Argyle AI Leadership Forum, Innovation, Transformation, and Strategy. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our speakers for this session. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience today. At any time during the event, you can visit those virtual booths from the main agenda page. To ask questions throughout the session and all sessions, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. Also, be sure to subscribe to Argyle on YouTube for exclusive access to all of our past events. Now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Ori Dinstein, Global Chief Privacy Officer, Marsha McClellan Companies, and Sandra Kevany, Transformational Technology Leader and CIO at Tate, NBC Universal Media, and DXC Technology. We are so excited to have Ori and Sandra with us for a fireside chat titled Balancing AI Innovation and Safety. Welcome, Ori and Sandra. Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Or
you,
you want to
Vicki.
start? Yeah.
Yeah, let me just add, Marsh McLennan is a large professional services company that primarily deals with insurance broking and consulting in the HR space and more broadly in the general consulting space. And we operate in some 120 countries around the world, and we obviously deal with a lot of data, and we also have a lot of IT development and AI development, and we've been very big adopters of Gen AI since that revolution started last year.
Great. And I'm Sandy Kevany. I have been a digital transformation leader and most recently CIO for over 30 years and have had the opportunity to build and direct innovation centers and also a lot of centers of excellence, both on the PMO side as well as the DevOps side, and certainly the app dev in different areas, and certainly latest with NBC Universal with their SAP COE. So, and most recently, my adventure with Tate, I've been the CIO there, and I had the opportunity to rebuild their entire IT organization and structure so that they had something that was really a powerhouse to support Tate in their growth, because they've had exponential growth over the last 3 years. If you don't know who Tate is, so anyway, those are the kind of things that we've been working on, and look forward to having more of this conversation as we go forward. So, Ori, I think I'd love you to start. Key question, what do you see as the biggest risk for Gen AI?
Well, it's hard to point to one risk as the biggest risk, but maybe I'll touch on several. I'd say that there's traditional risks that apply to AI. And so obviously regulatory risk, right? You have to comply with the relevant laws. And as we'll discuss, there's a growing number of laws that apply to the AI space, and you need to follow them, track them, find them, understand them, and follow them. So that's sort of a traditional risk. You have contractual risk, which again, if you're using AI or like any other technology, do your contracts allow that? Are you using it within the contours of the contract, or doing things that are not contractually allowed? And you've got vendor risk to the extent that you're using third parties, and you need to make sure that you have the right controls in place. But AI introduces some more unique risks that perhaps go beyond those traditional types of risks. So I would say that probably the biggest concern, or the two biggest concerns that I want to flag, one is sort of, and has to do with the way AI is used. It's the risk of misuse and misattribution, right? It's really tempting to throw a question into a model like ChatGPT and then just cut and paste the answer and use it. And of course, because it isn't always the right answer, you run a risk that you're basically passing on bad information. And there's also concerns from an intellectual property side, who owns the information. And if you're passing it on as your work product, basically you're misrepresenting the fact that this is not your work product. So all of these are kind of use misattribution, I think, is one area of concern. And the other has to do with the reliance on AI to act instead of individuals, or basically to displace humans. And there again, you get to the concerns around accuracy. You get to the concerns around lack of sort of discretion, because AI may get to the right answer from a technical aspect, but there's a human side to things. There's compassion, right? I might reject you for a loan or an application, but if I talk to you and understand your circumstances, I might treat you as an exception. And AI doesn't do that well. And it poses a broader risk to companies about the future of work as AI is coming in and sort of displacing manual kind of chores, sorting through data, analyzing things, writing memos. AI can really, the Gen AI stuff can really do a lot of the more junior level work. And then what happens when companies decide that they don't need those junior workers, right? Who's going to be the future workforce if all you have is people who become more and more senior and there's no new junior people coming in because AI has taken away their world. And then lastly, and this is again a bit of an intellectual property concern, but as companies are using external models, there's a concern that your data is flowing over to those models, being ingested by them and used to train further future versions of those models. And then again, there's loss of confidential information, loss of personal data, loss of intellectual property, all of these things that your employees are just typing into a chat GPT, and they might suddenly become embedded into that model. And there's been cases where people have posed questions to the models and they've actually responded by disclosing confidential or personal data of other people that was in the model, and you want to prevent that. So those are some of the sort of key risks that I see. And let me flip it over to you, because some of the other risks that I didn't talk about are sort of technological risks. So putting aside the legal stuff, what are you seeing on the tech side?
Well, I agree with everything. Yeah, thank you. I agree with everything you're saying. And it's interesting because I think, people think technology, and what we're seeing is that especially the organization that I've been working with media and live entertainment in particular, there is a culture of innovation. Okay, so our organizations love to innovate. They're front and forward as far as how to get things done, coming up with unique ideas, coming up with ways to reinvent the way that they present live entertainment. And as a result, they want to move fast, they want to move quickly, they want to just grab what the latest technology is and bring it in. And that is a key challenge, because with them not being able to, with them feeling like they can just do anything they want, we know, based on what you're saying, and I totally agree, that there's tremendous risk if they don't actually work with inside the controls and the processes and procedures that are set up. And so for us, even certainly from a Gen AI standpoint, but also even cybersecurity standpoint, we can put in all the technology and put in all the controls and the processes and procedures, but at the end of the day, it's the people. Our people are our biggest risk, because if they don't understand why we need to comply, why the controls need to be in place, why we need to take certain processes and procedures as we introduce new technology, we're going to run into huge issues, just like you referenced before, where people start using tools on their own that they don't realize that might be able to have visibility to our IP and to our key information that really defines how we work and work as an organization. So we've really been working very carefully with business executives and the business owners, and even the country owners, to really educate them not only on what needs to be done and what capabilities are available, but also to make sure they understand why. Because when they understand why, they're much more willing to comply. And our mantra is, it just takes one person not to comply to actually get a situation in place where we're either breached or we have some issues that we need to tackle. And our data is our key element, our key differentiator in the business. And if we release data unintentionally, that's a big loss for the organization. So we just concentrate, our people is our biggest risk. And that's what we need to work with.
Yeah, but more specifically, I mean, some of the more technical risks that we talk about in AI are things like, well, obviously there's a risk of bias, underlying biases in the data sets that are being used or in the models, and that could produce biased results, hallucination by the model. And again, that's become a fairly well-known thing, that AI can give you phenomenally good results and phenomenally made up results, and it's sometimes hard to know which is which. And also many of the AI models have controls in place to prevent you from asking questions that perhaps we don't want the model to answer, like how do I blow up something, or how do I steal money from some place. But people have figured out ways around those controls, which is called jailbreaking. Are any of those things that you spend any time worrying about?
All of them. But certainly, I mean, that's the whole concept here is that by educating our people on what to look for, and to actually know how to prompt and how to query and how to work with the tools more effectively, that we enable them to be our biggest guardians of our data and our information. And so I think there's all those aspects are certainly concerns, and certainly as as we talk about the future and how we need to see, it's really critical that we are able to look at how we're using technology effectively and how we're putting more controls in place to prevent our people and external resources to access the information that we have in place. So certainly something that you talked about with the licensing, really making sure that people understand the licensing and why we want to bring the licensing in, so we can control how people are using the technology and tools and make sure the right security and controls are in place in advance. So, but you also had a comment, I think a thing that you wanted to talk about around privacy laws and how they intersect with AI. Did you want to give your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, because obviously anything can go into the Gen AI tools, and that includes a lot of personal information. And so privacy laws and privacy regulators have a keen interest in these tools. In fact, the Italian Data Protection Authority, the Garante, was actually one of the first to issue a sort of stop use to ChatGPT because of privacy concerns, and they've since rescinded that order. But there's always been a concern about how privacy laws apply in the context of Gen AI LLMs, large language models. And one of the key issues is that they almost operate in reverse, in the sense that models need a ton of data, and they're actually constantly looking for more data. And privacy is all about data minimization and data deletion, and don't keep data longer than necessary. And so there's a bit of a tug of war, if you will, between privacy professionals and Gen AI tools, where that conflict comes to bear. On the other side, both privacy and AI are very much focused on prohibitions or restrictions or limitations on auto decision making, and again, trying to make sure that the tools don't sort of go off on their own and make decisions without a human in the loop. And so that's an area where privacy and AI are very much aligned on the need to mitigate that risk. There's many other pieces of privacy laws that are becoming interesting topics of conversation. For example, many privacy laws make a distinction between a controller and a processor. The controller is the person who owns the data. The processor operates at the instruction of the controller. And the question is, are Gen AI tools controllers, or are they processors? And it becomes important because certain individual rights, like the right to deletion, come into play, and the right to deletion should be handled by the controller. And so if you discover, or if you suspect that your data has been ingested into, say, ChatGPT, do you have the right to go to ChatGPT and say, remove my data from the model, which everyone understands is not feasible. I mean, there's no such thing as removing data from a model, because the model has now been trained, and you can remove it from the underlying data set, but then you'd have to retrain the model, and that's a really expensive operation. So some of these things are stuff that the regulators are really still trying to figure out how they're going to work in reality.
There'll be ongoing conversations on that. I mean, it's never going to stop. it's always trying to see how they're going to control and what they're going to do.
Yeah. So let's shift away from risk and talk a bit about mitigation strategies. So obviously, one of the biggest concerns that Gen AI poses is that how do you recognize that something that was sent to you, like you asked me for a memo, I'm a consultant, you asked me for a memo, I hand you the memo, and you're like, how do I know if Ori wrote this or whether he went to ChatGPT, Google, so I keep saying ChatGPT because they're the most famous ones, but there's
Right.
obviously quite a few other models out there. So how do I know? And so there's been talk about data tagging and sort of to make sure that output from these models is tagged in a way that you will always know. And the same with audiovisual work. So if you see a photo, how do I know if this is a real photo or if this is a made up photo that created by Gen AI? What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts on that?
We're trying to, one of the things that we found certainly is to, whether it's cybersecurity or AI, what we're trying to do is educate our organization on how to look at tagging and how to look at pictures to tell if they're real or not. We've actually created chatbots that they can send a message into chatbots internally and ask those questions and say, is this real? Is this not real? Is this true content? And really go after that. So enabling the very real-time interaction with the business to be able to check on things for them and allow them to take a look and see exactly what's going on. We also do what we call series of every single month. We do real-time chats with the entire organization and continue to educate them on examples of how to look at content and tell if it's real or not, and to be able to work with that. The other side of content tagging is the data side for ourselves, where we're trying to really look at how to make sure that the data that we have is real and true, and looking at that from that standpoint. So we're doing a series of what we call incubator labs, where we're actually testing out different kind of capabilities and content tagging tools to actually see how they work, and basically to test out what will work effectively and how to work with it. So I think there's a lot more to be seen in that area, but I'm excited about the ability to really explore more about how to leverage content tagging and to manage data more effectively, both external data coming in as well as our own internal data.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And this is not just a theoretical issue. Actually, I should have mentioned one of the ways, and this is playing out, is that the bad guys are using deepfakes, using AI to create deepfakes and target companies. And there's actually a recent story of a person who was invited to a Zoom call with whom he thought was his CFO and a bunch of other senior execs in the company, and all of them were deepfakes that were all put into the Zoom just to convince that poor individual to make a significant financial transfer to another country. And so the risk of AI content being used to mislead individuals for criminal purposes is actually a real one. But let's talk beyond tagging. What are some of the other techniques or tools that you guys are leveraging to mitigate other risks related to AI?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is, because I have an organization full of innovators, they want to test out, they want to grab any kind of new tool, any kind of AI generated capability and test it out. Something like Midjourney. We do a lot of design work with all our projects, and so tools like Midjourney and other AI design tools they want to test out and use. And so what we've created is to be able to make sure that we're protecting them from a license standpoint and also from a data standpoint. We've actually created these incubator labs, which is called an innovation lab. And basically what we do is put the license, put the capability, put the set a set of outcomes that they're trying to test out with actually executing design, and really see how far they can take it and what they can leverage with it, as well as, you talked about, especially with IP, where does a AI generated capability versus the IP that's associated with it, where is that division of labor, and how do you divide out what is something that's a generic design versus an IP related design. And so really kind of testing out that concept. We're working with our legal team and our compliance teams to really test out how we are going to guide and use those tools, as well as educate our business owners on how to best leverage these capabilities. So we're using a series of innovation labs based on specific criteria, outcomes that we're trying to get at. We see Gen AI as having a lot of capabilities around pulling in a whole set of data from all different sources and being able for us to leverage it effectively. But to make sure that we're using the right AI capabilities and the right language models and be able to do that effectively, that's why we're setting up those labs. And it's pretty exciting because we're in the process of doing those. We're also educating our business on what actually does work and what doesn't work. You know, they had with ChatGPT, they expected that all you do is type something in and out, you get all this output, and you can take it across your entire landscape, right? All your platform, all your applications within your platform, and do the same thing easily. Well, that's not the case. And so using these labs as a way to really educate the organization on how to use the tools, how to use the prompts, how to get the information that you want. So I think I'm the next one to have you ask you a question, right? And sorry, I lost it. So you, so with Marsh McClellan, you basically decided to use and create your own AI tool set, right? To go across your platforms. Can you tell me more about exactly how you made that decision and what has been your experience so far?
Yeah, so we early on decided that some of the key risks posed by AI can be solved by basically bringing that technology in-house and preventing the flow of information to the external parties. So we were one of the first companies to license the OpenAI LLM and basically bring it in and build our own front end on top of that. And that way we control the data flow, we control what goes where, and we also manage how long both the prompts and the outputs are kept, which is a very short amount of time, basically just through the session. Once the session is over, we don't really want to keep anything. And we've obviously put more controls around that, including through the API, we're able to control what questions people can pose, and again, how the model is used. But the key thing for us is that nothing flows back outside of our firewall. So that has given us the freedom to use the tool, including with sensitive proprietary data that otherwise we would not allow. And that's been really, really successful. And we have significant, we track how many of our colleagues use the tool, and the number is quite significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think depending on the organization, how far you can use OpenAI versus other tool sets, and certainly how you upgrade it, how you leverage it. So you don't let them use any, you control any use of any other tools inside their endpoints, their laptops.
We allow access to some of the other tools, but they basically have to get approved by us. And that's part of sort of the other sort of big part of our risk mitigation process is that we have an AI governance framework. We have an AI governance committee, and any either homegrown or external tool that somebody wants to use goes through a rigorous risk review process, which includes both sort of a legal review, a technology review, and a risk review, so that we have the subject matter experts weigh in, and a broader sort of risk perspective of, is this the kind of tool that we would like in our environment? Does it provide value? Do the risks have proper mitigation? Should mention ethics, right? Is the tool going to be way and one that we would be proud of or embarrassed if it emerged that we were using that tool? So all of that is part of our governance framework. And so we don't let you just open any existing AI tool out there and just play with it. You have to get permission.
We've also put in the same kind of governance. So with our digital transformation effort, there's a series of tools and platforms that we're going to use across that. Gen AI obviously is going to be part of that, because we see it as our ability to actually accelerate kind of decision-making, designs, capabilities. And so it's really, and also from a service standpoint, after these projects are launched. And so it's, but it's certainly required both from a governance, from which areas do we want to concentrate on, which areas do we want to, requirements do we want to prioritize on, and then also the data and information that we want to control going in, as well as, how we want to leverage these tools and what we want to, which tools we want to use and not use. So, but I think it's fascinating, with just picking OpenAI and just going with it. So you did a kind of selection process based on the requirements to select that tool.
Yeah. And actually, I see there's a question posed on how to protect your intellectual property, and that really is the answer, right? By bringing in internally, there's no risk to our intellectual property because it can't really flow out to any other third-party actor. And so again, we allow anything in our prompts because we don't have to sit and say, well, if that goes in the prompt, it's going to flow out the door, and that poses a risk for, again, proprietary data, intellectual property data, client data, personal data, and so forth. So we impose no limits on what people can, and you can upload files into the tool. So you can take like a file with colleague compensation data and ask it to help you analyze the compensation, look for trends, look for places where people perhaps are not getting paid fairly, and so forth. And at the end of the session, the whole thing goes away, and you don't have to say, "Oh, I just sent the file with all our compensation to somewhere that I don't know what they're going to do with it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, in the interest of time, let's shift to our third sort of category of sort of trying to look down the road. So I'm really curious, what are your thoughts about, obviously this is a very fast moving space. 2 years ago, this wasn't a thing, and suddenly it's all encompassing everything AI, everywhere AI. What's next? What do you think is next in the AI evolution?
Well, I think, for one thing, I think it's fascinating because 10 years ago, when I was working on leading an innovation center for a technology consulting firm, we were using AI and machine learning and doing test scenarios, leveraging all those capabilities. And so I think it's interesting because AI has been around for a long time. With the introduction of ChatGPT and the blowout of that across the globe, it actually accelerated the interest and the knowledge across the businesses as to how to use it. I think that, what I'd like to see, one of the things that we're seeing right now from a technology standpoint is that every single software capability is adding an AI component to it. And so everybody's trying to advertise, we have an AI component with our application, with our solution. We have an AI component. Because a platform of solutions has a series of, all our platforms have a series of solutions, and one AI that's used for one solution will not cover the capabilities of what we need across the organization. So our data goes across all our solutions, and because of that, we need a comprehensive, highly integrated and advanced Gen AI solution that one can handle data going across all the applications, as well as control, as you said, what is going to be able to be used and how it's going to be able to be used. So I think that those are the things that, as it progresses, we'll have to really take a careful look at. I certainly believe, and we work heavily with our legal counsel as well as our CISO, and making sure that we keep in touch on all angles. I think there'll be a lot more legislation and certainly debates on people's ability to, leverage Gen AI for the future. I think there'll be a lot of misinformation out there that they'll have to manage, and we'll have to make sure that we communicate and educate our organizations on. People will continue to push the limits of the technology, and we'll just have to make sure that we keep heightened awareness of how that's going to impact, like you referenced, deep fakes, and how to manage that, and really have good discussions inside the organization about what that means, what to look for, and make sure we're able to respond effectively on that. But I think, I'm excited about what Gen AI can provide to the organization. I think we just need to figure out how best to leverage it and use it and keep ourselves educated. And how about you? What are your thoughts? What are your biggest concerns?
Well, I'll stick to my lane and focus on the legal side.
Okay.
We've seen just the beginning of some AI legislation. Obviously, the EU was first with the EU
Right.
AI Act, which is coming into effect in tranches, but starting next year. And we certainly have a few states in the US that have passed legislation, including Colorado and California. There's some new AI rules in China and South Korea. And so the future is, as you said, there will be a lot more laws, a lot more regulation, a lot more expectations that companies use AI safely and in a way that addresses the various risks and the different concerns that regulators have. Very much focus on bias and discrimination is something that regulators are very worried about, tied to the auto decisioning and the idea
Mhm.
that in the future you'll apply for a credit card or a bank loan or for employment, and that an AI bot somewhere will just decide that you're not the right person, and you have no recourse, you have no awareness, understanding of why you got rejected. And
Mhm.
so I think those are some of the areas that regulators are going to and laws are going to be heavily focused on. And certainly regulators are in the US are starting to step into the AI space again from their own perspective. So for example, the SEC is starting to focus on what they call AI washing, which is companies who, because everything AI, so people take an existing process and suddenly call it an AI-driven
Mhm.
process, and it's not.
Right.
And so they're going after companies who are touting AI capabilities that don't really exist or are heavily exaggerated. The FTC, of course, is looking at cases where companies are misbehaving in the AI space, and the New York Department of Financial Services has just issued an industry letter on AI risks that they expect financial services to manage. So again, the future will be a lot more regulation, a lot more guidance, and probably a lot more confusion because it's really hard to comply with all these laws with their different
Oh,
definitions and
yes.
different institutions.
And
And
also, yeah.
even just the basic question of what is AI, because
Mhm.
unfortunately many of these laws are written in a way that drags in things that have been in place for 50 years.
Right.
People have been using supposed, things that are sort of boring traditional AI
Mhm.
literally since the 70s or even earlier. And now suddenly all of that has become a problem. Really, the problem is the generative AI stuff. But again, the laws don't make that distinction as easily.
Mhm.
So we'll see. I think again, the only thing I can predict is that there will be a lot more work for lawyers.
Well, a lot more work for technologists as well, especially around vulnerability, ways to get into the systems, protecting the data. It's yeah, uh, I, insane the amount of work that we do around cyber and security already. And as you add the Gen AI component to it and trying to look at all those vulnerabilities, it really becomes a massive, massive effort. And that's why I keep saying that our biggest strength and our biggest risk is our own people, to be able to make sure that they're educated, that they're able to respond, that we give them the tools to maybe actually understand what Gen AI is and what it isn't. And because everybody's trying to promote their own version of it, there's lots of different spins and flavors and ways that you can use it. But I think it's going to be, I think it has tremendous power and potential, but also tremendous risk as well. And yeah, we work heavily with legal. I feel really strongly about working. Your comment about contracts, and we have contracts with a lot of different organizations for the work that we do, and trying to take a look at what those contracts allow for and don't allow for is really critical. And I think there'll be much more of that as it goes forward to protect both the clients, own IP as well as ours.
Yeah. So I see somebody posted a question about what specific regulatory measures should companies keep an eye on in 2024. So I mean, first of all, the EU, as was the case with the GDPR, tends to be sort of the first mover that sets the tone for many other countries. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the EU's AI Act serves as a model for other countries to emulate. And then in the US, I would keep a close eye on California, because California is usually the first mover and the bellwether for the rest of the states. Just like many years ago, California passed the first breach notification law, and then everyone else followed, and California passed the first privacy law, and now we have some 22 states with privacy laws. So keep a close eye on what California does in the AI space, because that will be highly influential.
Yeah, just like yeah, definitely from that standpoint. I think there was an interesting question about how CIOs, CISOs, and CTOs can work together to create that culture. And as being part of an executive leadership group inside the organization, we talk all the time and have weekly calls just to concentrate on how to bring both innovation as well as protect, determine how we're going to leverage AI, look at the licenses, look at how we're going to be able to manage the expectations both of the organization, the users, as well as our external customers, to protect both, allow for innovation, but also protect the innovation that we are creating. So it's an interesting balance, but I highly, I'm very lucky that we have I've had great experiences working with legal and compliance to make sure that we're able to work together to develop our technology and our capabilities going forward. So keep talking.
Yeah. I want to echo that. I mean, as you guys can tell from this conversation, AI really transcends technology and law and regulation, and this partnership is critical. And in our company, when we embarked on our journey to create a new AI tool, I was literally in the room pretty much from the minute that idea was floated. There was a clear, and our CISO was in the room, and of course our CIO and other people. There was a whole bunch of folks that were involved. But the point is that we very early on understood that this has to be a collaboration of technology, security, privacy, legal, and that's the only way that this can work. And so related to that, there's an interesting question about what practical steps companies can take to embed ethical considerations into AI development. And I think that's in part the answer is exactly what we've just discussed. It's that hybrid coalition of participants, right? Because there's no, unless a company either has a sort of internal group that's responsible for ethics, like sometimes there's a group called like safety and ethics or something like that, then of course you kind of give them the mandate to decide what's ethical and what's not ethical. Some companies like Meta have an external ethics board, and then of course you've got, again, that decision making. But I think for most companies, ethics is just part of everyone's responsibility. And that's where, again, when you go through a risk review, as I said in our company, the new AI tools go through a legal review, a tech review, and a risk review. And in that process, ethical considerations are very much front of mind. Because again, there's this mantra that just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And with AI, there's so much stuff that you can do. And yet you have to ask yourself, is this the right thing? Right. And so for us, ethics is not one person's job that you say that's the person who becomes the conscience of the organization, but it's a whole bunch of people who all have a seat at the table and can say, why are we doing this?
Yeah, we leverage both our executive leadership group that meets on a weekly basis, as well as we have a group that just has the legal, HR, and technology, and also marketing. We work that group every week and really have those conversations about things that get popped up. And it's not just about generative AI, it's also about internal communication tools like Slack and other tools that you're using. Those kind of questions come up all the time, and being able to kind of point determine what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, and really kind of guide those conversations, and then communicate out with the rest of the organization as to why these things are being controlled from that standpoint. Is very critical. We also use our governance councils, where we have our business leadership, business executives, people that own different parts of the business, to have those conversations, and it's brought up there as well. And so I think that constant conversation about how to work within the boundaries that we have and make sure it's communicated out is really critical.
Yeah. That's great. So I see there's one more question that we didn't touch, which has to do with what are some of the fundamental risk management strategies that IT leaders should consider when developing AI solutions. And I think that I've actually spoken quite a bit about that, but again, with the risk framework that I mentioned. And obviously there's a lot more moving parts to the idea of just having a risk framework, because, for example, in the review process, you might flag certain risks and then say, I'm willing to accept the risk, or you're willing, or you can find mitigants around the risk. So one of the things that's important to have is to have sort of a risk register where you can capture those risks, especially the risks that you've accepted, and to see if over time those risks have become bigger, or the mitigation that you put in place has not been effective. So that's another key part of it. And I think that's probably the most critical thing with AI. AI is constantly evolving in different directions. The use cases, things that 6 months ago we didn't think were possible, are now something that we do without a second's thought. And of course, as AI is evolving into more skills, including in the audio visual space, and the ability to convert text to speech, and image to text, and the text to image already exists. Of course, you can type, draw me a unicorn playing a violin, and there you go. So all these things, as they evolve, you have to constantly ask yourself, the fact that I was okay with something 6 months ago and I still did today. And so I think that these are all the sort of big moving parts that I think would be part of a risk mitigation program.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came up really quickly for me with risk management with the IT side is that we had because our teams love to try on new technology and new capabilities as they wanted to test out new things like Midjourney. We really had to look at the licensing, right? Because the licensing, an individual license with Midjourney would allow any data that they put inside that system to be able to leverage by anybody in the future. And so we actually had to make sure that we had the right structure and right licenses in place in order to allow for our data to be kept inside our structure and not to be disseminated accidentally out to other organizations. So those are the kind of things that, fundamentally, if someone's interested in taking a look at a new technology, or that, really understanding the licenses, how it's going to be used, what data is going to be available externally, and really know those things, working with legal to really understand exactly what is possible, what risks you run up front. I mean, it's no different than if you're doing a big implementation of big digital transformation. You're running that risk management tool across the entire portion of the organization. The same thing with AI. You have to really keep the risk registry in place along the entire time, and keep it updated on a regular basis based on what you see. So.
So I know we're getting close to the end. Maybe just to pose one last question with sort of a 10-second answer. AI, is it going to be the end of the world like Terminator, or is this one of those things that's just going to make our life better and we can continue to manage it?
I just saw a recent study where they were saying that, with the introduction of Gen AI, that all these jobs are going to go away. Here's my perspective. I've seen over the course of time that we introduce new capabilities and new tools, and there's always that fear that somehow it's going to replace, like you do a transformation effort and all of a sudden, you remove a quarter of the jobs because, the tools are able to automate and actually accelerate a lot of the processing of basic functionality. I would challenge that we can say that with Gen AI, we really redefine how we are using our human interaction to make decisions, and to, there will always be a need for human interaction with the processes and the capabilities. What I see with Gen AI used correctly is it empowers us with more data and information to be able to have actionable decisions more quickly, and to be able to actually move and accelerate the processing and the capabilities that we're putting into place. So that's, I look at that glass half full, right? So, but understanding there's also the whole risk associated with, So what's your thoughts?
Let's I think that's a good place to end, and I certainly share your optimism and enthusiasm, but again, I keep a wary
With
eye on some of
caution,
the
yeah.
developments. Yes, and the day that they combine AI and robotics in a way that that we get these Terminator devices walking around with their own brain, that's when I start to worry. But with that, let's end and hand
Yeah.
it back to our hosts. And thank you, Sandy. This was
Thank
great.
you,
I
Ori.
enjoyed our chat.
Wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ori and Sandra, for a fabulous fireside chat. What a great discussion. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And as a reminder, please do check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points to win a prize. Our next session will begin at 12:25 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will be a fireside chat titled From Automation to Transformation: How AI is Reshaping the Way We Work. Please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be directed to that session, and we look forward to seeing you there.